Oh hey, welcome back. The thrifting gods have once again smiled upon me, so I have something to show you. A few weeks ago I did a video on the Yamaha CT810 and y'all seem to really like that, so I have another radio tuner for you. But this one's a little bit different, and quite a bit flatter. I present to you the MacBook Air of early 80s radio tuners. It's the Technics ST-S3 Quartz Synthesizer FM AM stereo tuner. It's thin. I picked this one up a few weeks ago, but I only just got around to testing it, which was stupid because the thrift store only has a few-day return policy on electronics, so if it didn't work, I would have been kind of hosed. But fortunately, it works great. Now, I have to admit, I spent a little more money on this than I usually tend to. It was $25, but I myself have never seen one of these in person, so it was worth it for me to grab it. And if you're wondering, I believe these sold for $290 when they came out back in 1980. That would be over $1,000 today. You notice that handsome brushed aluminum finish? See the color? Yeah, it wasn't that color when I bought it. You could be forgiven for thinking it was supposed to have a gold finish on it. That's because whoever owned this previously either had a penchant for barbecuing pork in their living room or they were a heavy smoker. Most likely the latter. This thing was quite dirty. In retrospect, I should have taken some pictures of that. But at any rate, it's clean now, so let's talk about it. With a slim profile of only 2 inches high, they opted for a push-button only interface, giving it a nice sleek appearance. And although they didn't have any actual knobs on here, they implied the look by making the tuning buttons larger and round, which I think was a really cool stylistic choice. You have a small latching push-button switch for the power, and next to it is the vacuum fluorescent display with its classic pale bluish-green color. On the far right, as I said earlier, are the tuning buttons. These increase the AM frequency by increments of 10 kHz and 0.2 MHz for FM each time you press them. Or you can push and hold and it will rapidly increase or decrease the frequency. It doesn't have a search function, however. You still have to manually find the station, and that's where the rest of the interface comes in. Once you've found a favorite station, say for example KY 94.5 if you're in Mendocino County, California, you can save it to one of 7 memory slots which can then be recalled whenever you want. Each memory slot has a light above it. If there's nothing saved, pressing the button will do nothing and the light will stay dark, so you know that it's empty. To save the station, you just tap the memory button, select the slot you'd like to use, and presto, you're saved. Now, when you want to listen to 94.5 again, you just hit 4 and it's back. There is one important thing to remember about the memory. It will only work as long as the unit remains plugged in. If you unplug it, you lose your saved stations and strife and despair will wash over the kingdom. But don't worry, all is not lost. On the underside, there's a battery compartment for 3 AA batteries so you can save your stations even if the power goes out, which is really necessary if your power is supplied by SoCal Edison. Now finally, you have your FM AM selector switch and your muting and mode switch. The labeling is kind of confusing, but essentially when you turn on the muting function, you also automatically engage FM stereo multiplexing. Conversely, without the muting, you only have mono FM. The muting function is basically there to suppress the audio output when the signal is below a particular strength threshold. Essentially, that gets rid of the hiss when you're not on a strong station. The trade-off is that you also lose the weaker stations. Not everybody likes the weak fuzzy stations, man. This unit boasts a quartz lock system. Now normally that would be there in an analog tuner to take over the fine tuning and automatically lock onto a signal once you found it by referencing a known frequency on a vibrating piece of quartz crystal. That's why the font uses hexagons, because, you know, crystals. As you'll see in a moment, however, this unit is entirely digital. There's no large variable capacitor or anything like that. It's all on a chip. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the quartz lock system is essentially providing a reference signal for each discrete step as you cycle through them rather than waiting for a proximity to a signal for it to lock onto. Let's flip it around to the back because there's some interesting stuff going on back there as well. The usual suspects are all present. You have your stereo RCA output jacks, your FM and AM antenna hookups with a big ground clip that we will get to in a second, and your attached AM antenna. Now that ground clip serves a specific function, but may not be exactly what you expect. Or let's say, it wasn't what I expected. Opinions online seem to disagree a little bit here, but the predominant idea, assuming you have this thing hooked up to a giant metal rooftop antenna, is that ground clip is there to reduce the danger from lightning strikes, which is both comforting and unnerving at the same time. To the far left, you have a switch that selects between a normal broadband antenna and a narrowband antenna designed to operate at a specific frequency. Additionally, remember how I said that the tuner changes by discrete increments? Well, those increments are what we use here in North and South America, but in Europe, as well as Asia, Africa, and Australia, the frequency allocation is a little bit tighter. So you can actually flip over to those with this other switch on the back here. If we come back around to the front, you can see that the frequencies are now different. So that's the basic functionality of this unit. I also forgot to mention that this was available in black as well. But now that we've gone over what it does, what say we ignore the warning label and open the thing. To get inside, I'm very pleased to say that you only have to remove 4 screws, 2 on the right and 2 on the left. Then the metal shell comes off. Now this is actually a pretty densely populated little box. Not a lot of unused space, kind of unusual considering some of the other things that we've covered on this channel. One thing I wasn't expecting was the way that the buttons interact on the front panel. The buttons themselves are actually mounted flat on the board and they interface with the panel with these little pivoting keys. I feel like I should have anticipated that because you can feel a lot more resistance at the bottom than you do at the top. I also really like the way that they ran the lights through these little curved light channels. In the center of this section, you can see the AN7001 chip. That's a digital tuner chip, which replaces all of the variable capacitors and stuff like that. Smaller and lighter. Definitely explains how you can make this machine this compact and light. I had to do a sound test with it just for sheer curiosity's sake. I don't usually do stuff like this here because this isn't a review channel, but I really wanted to get an idea of the difference between this one and a few pieces of equipment that I'm familiar with. So I compared it to the Yamaha CT-810 that I have, and then to an old realistic receiver that I also have. It was interesting. Unfortunately, I can't really let you hear that because I was using music stations to make the comparison. And as I have lamented many times before, copyright rules prevent me from showing you. Nonetheless, I screwed around with it for about a half an hour to an hour, and I got an idea of the sound. So using the Yamaha CT-810 as a reference, because I spent so much time using it for the video I did about it, I listened to several music stations and multiple talk stations on both AM and FM. I switched back and forth and tried to really figure out the difference. It was obvious compared to the realistic, but much less so between the Yamaha and the Technics. I'll state for the record right now, I think I got a great deal on this thing at $25. It has a very nice sound to it. I didn't quite like it as much as the Yamaha, but that's not a reflection of quality. The equalization just leans a little heavier to the treble for the Technics than it does for the Yamaha. However, it's subtle enough that to my admittedly untrained ear, I could just compensate with the settings on my amp and bring it more or less to my liking. Truthfully, I adjust that stuff every time I listen to something anyway, so that's not unreasonable. The biggest drawback for the ST-S3 was the reception. I was testing them all side by side with no antenna hooked up. The Technics struggled to pick up some signals without me laying my hand on top of it. I didn't have to do that with the other two. Because I'm in a condo with a very strict HOA that doesn't seem to mind noise, but hates anything on the outside of the buildings, I can't hook up an antenna. I wanted to hook up an antenna. In fact, I have a gigantic antenna sitting in the storage unit as we speak, which I'm upset that I didn't get to use. I think it would have made the test a lot more fair and a lot more interesting. However, I also acknowledge that probably people will be just using these without an external antenna. To be clear, I don't want to make it sound like this thing got poor reception. In fact, it got great reception, honestly, just maybe not quite as good as the other ones. If I hadn't been comparing them, I really wouldn't have noticed anything lacking. It's a nice sounding unit overall. So that's it. The Technics ST-S3 AM/FM stereo tuner. Big sound in a very flat package, like an Oreo thin. I hope you guys enjoyed that, or at least got something out of it. If you're new, check out some of the other pieces of equipment I've covered. There's some really cool stuff, and there's quite a bit more coming. In fact, I just picked up a Nakamichi cassette player. We also have a Weltron Spaceball and one of those cool Zenith Circle of Sound sets, and some really cool stuff from Bang & Olufsen. So see you guys again soon, and I hope you guys had a really metal holiday. Have a good one.